Okay, we'll kick off, and now we're going straight to item 24 in the public agenda. Welcome back, Sandra. So this is the conflict of interest. Get your paperwork. No, we brought this forward on the confirmation of the minutes to the beginning of the meeting. So, would you like to kick this off or? Okay. Now, I understand there's some discussion wanted around this, so I'm going to open it up to questions in the first instance. So, questions, councillors?
Well, I don't know if I have a question, but I sent through some comments, and I understand that they are being considered, and that some alternative proposals might be, wording might be offered.
Your Worship, I wonder if it might be helpful just to speak very briefly to the proposed amendments, because they arise out of some questions that Councillor McTavish sent through.
Okay.
They may or may not meet her concerns, but I will be proposing them as amendments to, and that may preempt some other questions, that's all.
Right. Can I then, just in terms of process, ask if you're moving that we confirm the conflict of interest policy subject to some amendments? That's effectively what you're doing. Sorry?
Yes, I'm happy to do it. I propose to move the amendments, but I'm happy to move the whole thing subject.
Well, that just gives us context for the discussion, that's all. So you've moved. Is there a seconder for that? Seconder, Councillor Staines. That's good. So can I invite you to speak to it, Councillor Thompson?
Before he does, would it be possible, Pam, to send that wording to all elected members so that we have it in front of us?
Put some different glasses on. There are a couple of areas of concern that were raised by Queen's Counsel McTavish, quite appropriately. One of them relates to 4.8.E, and I have discussed this with the chair of the audit committee just before the meeting, and she agrees that we should make a change. The intent of the process here is to ensure that council's processes are adequately protected from, and if I can give you an example, not to do with council, to do with something else I was involved in some time ago, where a very major contract was being let, and one of the people who would ultimately make the decision about that contract, one of the board members, was being wined and dined by one of the contractors. And so the intention of this is to ensure that somebody can't be inappropriately lobbied and be then involved in the decision-making process. And that's to protect council, obviously. However, the point has been quite legitimately made that there are staff within the organisation who are lobbied every day, and essentially it's part of their job. You see this happening in planning, you see it happening in policy areas where members of the public or organisations or whatever want to come in and talk about their concerns with council staff, and undoubtedly will have suggestions about what should be done differently. And that essentially is part of the normal day-to-day work of council employees. So the suggested amendment to make that clearer and to distinguish between these two situations is to add, to leave the first sentence, has been lobbied by an interested party through comments either formally or informally, where the interested party is intending to present a certain point of view, and to add, and where, sorry, I can't read it from here, I'm sorry.
I can read it. And where the receipt of such lobbying would not form part of the normal discharge of the staff members' duties.
Right. So that's the First Amendment. The Second Amendment, or proposed amendment, relates to what is currently section 6.2. And in 6.2.2, it notes that firstly there was an error. It referred to 6.3 and should have referred to 6.4. But that aside, it notes that there may be some situations outlined in 6.4, the limited activities, that are so minor as to be manageable in some other way. An example might be if you happen to be a 100% share owner in a company that is contracting for council services. You may work for the council and not work for the company. Clearly that is a very material conflict of interest. If in your superannuation policy your policy holder might have some shares in a company along with a whole pile of other things that essentially you have such a minor beneficiary interest in, there may be circumstances where that impact is, or that conflict is so minor that it could be managed. And the suggestion here is to, firstly, to get rid of 6 because it's confusing. It doesn't tell you how to manage it. 6.2, I'm sorry. And to amend 6.4 as is drafted up there and as I can't read. And to save confusion, to take the one part of 6.2.1 which isn't already covered elsewhere in the policy, which is the employee shall not take part in the decision-making activity or process, and add that into 6.1.1, which would enable the removal of the whole of section 6.2. I'm sorry, that's probably starting to sound really confusing. Now, I understand that Councillor McTavish may still have some concerns, but I'll get her to address those separately rather than confuse the issue.
So, let's explain more. So, further speakers, and that will give the opportunity for anyone to speak to the amendments as they are. Councillor Kell.
I don't want to speak, but I want to ask a question at this point.
Sure.
What I would like to know from staff is whether the issues that are being raised today had been previously raised, or whether they fit in with the advice that we've been given so far, or whether, because this has gone backwards and forwards, and we just the other day spent a while in audit and risk, so I'm just wondering how these changes fit in with what we've already had backwards and forwards.
These changes are in line with all of the discussions at audit and risk, and probably provide a bit of clarity around some of these things.
So they help achieve the objective and wouldn't require going back through a process and
I spoke with the chair of the Audit and Risk Committee following Councillor Thompson's conversation with her, and suggested there may be another couple of changes required, outlined what I thought they might be based on the questions we'd had in advance, and she was comfortable that they gave effect to what Audit and Risk were hoping to achieve.
Any further speakers? Councillor McTavish.
Well, firstly, I'd like to thank staff and Councillor Thompson for endeavouring to address these issues and doing so in a way that, in my view, gets us 98% of the way there. I'm not going to die in a ditch over the last 2%, so I will vote for this, but I'd just like to flag up, I think, the last remaining issue, which is that the way that it is proposed to function, with the addition around matters of indirect or insignificant conflicts being subordinate to 6.4.1 and effectively only 2 situations given in A and B. In my view, that's problematic because it confines that clause to being a subordinate clause to only 2 issues, rather than doing what, in my view, it ought to do, which is cover all potential conflicts. so that there is a mechanism for staff or the general manager or the chief executive to have conversations about matters that don't relate to shares in privately or closely held organisations or work for organisations that have dealings with the DCC. If we turn back to page 4.8, clause 4.8, there are a range of potential conflicts of interest outlined there, including having a strongly held opinion or view, or being lobbied by an interested party, albeit a modified version thereof, or being in a relationship, either familial or by marriage, with a person involved in the transaction or process. Those are all quite open statements, and in my view, there are a range of potential outcomes under any one of those clauses, ranging from minor and inconsequential through to quite clearly 100% shareholding and all of those issues. So the proposal that I sent through was simply to add in a C under 6.4.1, which reads something like, if they have any potential, perceived or actual conflict of interest, and that would widen the range of situations in which this clause applies, and give additional flexibility to staff in dealing with issues.
Okay, so there's two ways we can deal with this. This can be accepted by the mover as an additional change, or you could move this as an amendment to the resolution that's on the table, motion that's on the table. So,
Yep.
so Councillor Thompson.
Sorry, Your Worship. I just wonder whether, given that this is something that has just been tabled effectively, I wonder whether maybe the Chief Executive or the Governance Manager might have some views on whether or not the additional 2% is worth the trouble, or whether they feel that they have sufficient capacity to deal with the range of situations within the existing proposed wording.
Can we
Can I make one point before
Sure.
it's relevant to discussion?
Yeah.
And the matters covered in 4.8, with the exception of D, are all quite specifically stated as being material. So by definition, they are absolute. They're not ones that, if you have a material interest, by definition, you've already well above the threshold for the. That's why the distinction is being made between the two. Now, that's where I'm just trying to explain where the distinction came from in the mind of audit and risk. I'm not saying necessarily that council can't have a different view, but that's where the distinction came from, and that's why each of these will or may derive a material financial benefit, has a material financial interest. As an associate or party who may derive a material, so the material is the qualifier.
Okay. So going back to my question, I appreciate that, but so I guess what you're saying is that in that case there's no need for a C under 6.4.1 to further widen the net.
I'm not necessarily saying that, because council may well have a view that there is, but I'm saying that if that were the case, I think we would have to go back to audit and risk again, and because the other changes are ones that they don't change the intent in any way. They are intended to clarify logical missteps in the drafting. This would, I think, change the intent, and I think I wouldn't be comfortable as a member of Audit and Risk agreeing to that. I would feel it would be better to go back again to Audit and Risk.
So here's the process that I think we should follow. We will take this motion as it stands, because the mover and seconder are not comfortable to add any more into it in this instance, as has been explained. And Councillor McTavish, at the end of that, I will invite you to move that this be essentially laid on the table in order to reconfer with audit and risk, if that's the way you want to take it.
I wonder, Your Worship, whether it might be possible to have a response from the Chief Executive or the Governance Manager on the question that I asked, because that would influence my position.
My view would be that what you're proposing does materially change the clause, and at the Audit and Risk Committee, Section 6.4 was the clause that they spent the most time on and gave the most thought to, and so this is what they came up with was the subject of considerable discussion and debate, and so to make a change to that, in my view, we would need to take it back through the Audit and Risk Committee, because I think this does alter, if I understand what you're proposing, I think it does alter what they intended this clause to do.
Okay, so I think Council should be aware of the implications of the vote in that case. The vote, although I think I've wrongly suggested that Councillor McTavish should ask to lay this on the table after we've had the vote, but actually once we've confirmed this, that won't be possible. So the implications of the vote are that if you are content with this the way it is, after discussion, then vote for it, but that will be the end of it. If you are of a mind to be sympathetic to the points that Councillor McTavish has made, then my suggestion is that your option is to vote against it, so that it would then come back to.
Move an amendment, rather. Can you not do it the other way around?
Yeah, so, sorry, Your Worship. I guess I would seek your leave to ask one further question of Councillor Thompson, if that was a possibility at this point, for the purposes of clarity about the statement that he made.
Sorry, I didn't catch.
Would I be able to ask one further question
Yeah, sure.
of Councillor Thompson?
Sure.
Richard, the comment that you made about materiality, there is materiality mentioned in A, B, C and G. There is no materiality associated with D, E or F, so far as I'm currently aware. Is that, in that context, is it still your view that materiality relates to D, E and F as well, even though it's not mentioned?
Yes, it is, because the materiality in D is the word strongly, has a strongly held opinion or view, which is intended to refer to issues of predetermination. E, I think has well, I mean, I've suggested in the amendment that E be amended to, so its intent is really slightly different. I haven't thought through your question in context of that. And F is a binary situation, really. I mean, I don't know how you can be just a little bit materially married or a little bit not materially married. So, I mean, if you have a relationship including familial or by marriage with a person involved in the transaction of the process, then it's like one thing or another. It's not on a scale. I guess that's how I saw it.
Sorry, Your Worship,
You can suggest something else?
Yeah, so just further clarity around F, has a relationship including familial, suggests that perhaps it relates to relationships that are not indeed familial or by marriage, but is not exclusive of being familial or by marriage. Is that not the case?
If it would help the process, I don't think that audit and risk would be concerned if the word material was to be put in front of the word relationship, if that's what your concern is. Sandy, do you think? No.
Well, are you happy to include that, Councillor Thompson?
I'm happy to include that in the amendments.
Okay.
Thank you, Worship. With that amendment, I'm comfortable with the wording.
Right. Great. All right, so in addition to the changes, just to be clear, that in addition to the changes on the wall, the word material is to be inserted before the word relationship in 4.8F. Am I correct in that? Yes. Right. So that's what we're now voting on, and it's not an amendment, so I invite further speakers. There are none. All right. I'm going to put it in that. Or do you wish to speak? You write a reply?
Well, it has been a long gestation, but I think it's been a useful gestation, and even the debate we're having now, I think, exemplifies the difficulty of writing policies that in areas as vexed as this. And there were issues that were raised last time it came to council, particularly around the issue of volunteers, and that I think has been addressed, and upon reflection that was too strong, and also the degree of flexibility around staff ability to have input into areas where there is not, clearly a conflict of interest. And so I think we've finally got there, and I think it's a really important policy. I hope we can get to one for councillors a little more quickly than it's taken us to get to one for staff, because it strikes me as being absolutely critical that we do so. Otherwise, we are, in my view, guilty of extreme hypocrisy, and I'd like to see that changed as quickly as possible.
Thank you. I'm going to put it. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Thank you for that, and thank you to all of the councillors both on the Audit and Risk Committee and others who have taken so much trouble over that particular issue. Now we come back to item 6. So I will move from the chair the public part of the minutes of the ordinary meeting of the council held on the 11th of April 2016 being confirmed as a correct record. Seconded, Councillor Staines. Is there any discussion? All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Item 7, Councillor Benson-Clark.
Thank you, Mr Chairman. I'll move that the Council notes Part A items 1 to 6 of the minutes of the Planning and Regulatory Committee held on the 26th of April 2016.
Seconded, Councillor Hawkins. Discussion? Put it. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Item 8, Infrastructure Services Committee, Councillor Wilson.
I'll move that the minutes of the Part A items 1 to 10 of the minutes of the Infrastructure Services Committee held on the 26th of April 2016.
Seconded, Councillor Lord. Discussion? Put it. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Item 9, Community and Environment Committee, Councillor McTavish.
Thank you, Worship. I'll move that Council notes Part A items 1 to 10 and 12 of the minutes of the Community and Environment Committee meeting held on the 27th of April 2016 and approves the following Part B item of the minutes of the C&E Committee held on the 27th of April, that being item 11, Te Aotearoa, Dunedin's Environment Strategy, and noting, Your Worship, that marks a significant milestone for the city in terms of adoption of its 7th strategic strategy, and certainly a significant milestone for Dunedin's environment, it being the first Dunedin City Council environment strategy that we will be putting in place in the city's history, so far as I'm aware. So,
thank you. Seconded, Councillor Peake. Discussion? Put it. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Item 10, Economic Development Committee, Councillor Staines.
Thank you, Worship. I move that Council notes Part A items 1 to 6 of the minutes of the Economic Development Committee meeting held on the 16th of May 2016.
Seconded, Councillor Wiley. Discussion? Put it. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Item 11, Finance Committee, Councillor Thompson.
I'll move.
And seconded, Councillor Calvert. Any discussion? I'll put it. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Item 12, Audit and Risk Committee. Would someone like to read that, Councillor Thompson?
Well, I will have to read that one. I'll move that we note Part A items 1 to 10 of the minutes of the Audit and Risk Subcommittee meeting held on the 5th of April 2016, including items C1 to C4 and C7 of the non-public part of the minutes. B, approve the following Part B item of the minutes of the Audit and Risk Subcommittee meeting held on the 5th of April 2016, which was the Treasury Risk Management Policy Review. and C, takes part C items of the minutes of the Audit and Risk Subcommittee in the non-public part of the meeting.
Seconded. Councillor Calvert. In discussion? I'll put it. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Right, item 13, dog control policy and bylaw on the keeping of animals, excluding dogs, and birds bylaw hearing. Councillor Peake, would you like to move?
Thank you, Your Worship. Yes, I would like to. Do we have any staff who
Recommendation is that it be noted.
be noted? Yeah, okay. Just the minutes, yeah. Okay, I'll just move that. That's easy enough.
Yep. And do I have a second? Seconded, Councillor Benson Pope. You wish to speak to it? Yes.
No, I have a question though.
Oh, sure.
Because there are a lot of matters in the minutes that don't relate to their accuracy or not, about which I have no dispute, but I'd just like to be assured that I'll be able to raise questions about matters in the minutes when we come to the debate about the proposed bylaw.
Sure. As far as I am concerned, we're noting, and that is it. So, are there any further questions or discussion? I'll put it. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Okay, we're on to the minutes of the community boards, and number 14 is Waikouaiti Coast Community Board. Councillor New.
Thank you, Worship. I'll move that Council notes Part A items 1 to 10 and the public forum of the minutes of the Waikouaiti Coast Community Board held on the 13th of April 2016.
Are you not going to do all?
Seconded, Councillor Wilson. Any discussion? I'll put it. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Item 15, the Otago Peninsula Community Board. Councillor Peake.
I move that Council notes Part A, items 1 to 12, and public forum of the minutes of the Otago Peninsula Community Board held on the 14th of April 2016.
Is there a seconder for that? Councillor Hall. Discussion? Put it. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Strathtyre Community Board. Councillor Lord.
I'd just like to move that the Council notes Part A items 1 to 11 of the minutes of the Strathtyre Community Board held on the 14th of April and the attachment of the minutes later on.
Seconded, Councillor Wilson. Any discussion? I'll put it. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Number 17, Molesfield Tidy Community Board. Councillor Wilson.
Which I'll move that the Council notes Part A items 1 to 11 and the public forum of the minutes of the Mosgiel Torres Community Board meeting held on the 19th of April 2016.
Seconded, Councillor Lord. Put it. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Item 18, Chalmers Community Board. Councillor New.
Your Worship, I'll move that Council notes Part A items 1 to 13 of the minutes of the Chalmers Community Board meeting held on the 20th of April 2016.
Seconded, Councillor Hall. Discussion. I'll put it. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. And item 19, Saddle Hill Community Board. Councillor White.
Yeah, recommends that Council notes Part A items 1 to 11 of the minutes of the Saddle Hill Community Board meeting held on 21st of April 2016.
Seconded, Councillor Lord. Put it. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Okay, on to the reports. Item 20, 183 Gordon Road easement report.
Move the recommendation.
Sorry?
I'll move the recommendation.
Been moved. Is there a second?
Second. Yep.
Are there any? Seconded, Councillor Hall. Moved Councillor Wilson. Seconded, Councillor Hall. Welcome. Is there anything you'd like to kick off with, or just want to pick up questions? If there are any. Question.
Take any questions.
Questions, councillors? Councillor Murphy.
Fairly minor point or just clarification. I can't quite see the map as I had now. In terms of the foul sewer that runs through the reserve, I assume it backs onto the residential properties and runs parallel with the back of the properties. Yes. I do note that there are a number of trees on the reserve, and I suppose in terms of managing the reserve, are we slightly separate to this matter, but are we ensuring that we don't have issues related to roots making their way into the foul sewer?
Yes. Yes, all of the work's been overseen by our water and waste team and our Parks and Rec arbitrist.
Thank you.
Councillor Kell.
When it says that the subdivision is subject to these easements, is there something in it that just says the subdivider must apply for or have granted, or what's the wording of it?
It was a condition of the consent, so these foul sewers have already been put into the ground. They were done in August 2015, so this is just formalising the easements. So it was part of the consent that they had to go through this process.
So if we didn't grant them, what would happen?
I'm not 100% sure on that answer, but what I can say is this is something that is an error that was picked up that staff should have brought to council at an earlier stage than we have now. And we've got some robust processes in place to ensure that this won't have to happen retrospectively again.
So is it that we really can't not grant them? I mean, for practical purposes, we've demanded them, the pipes are in the ground, and not granting them isn't a realistic option?
Councillor Hall.
Have you looked at going through your reserves using welded pipes rather than jointed pipes? So that way no roots can get into the system at all?
That's a call for Water and Waste Services, and I believe in this case they are polyethylene pipes and therefore welded.
Right. No further questions, so it's been moved and seconded. Is there any discussion? I'm going to put it. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. Thank you. Now, item 21, same team. Easement request over the Dunedin Town Belt, 22 Lachlan Avenue. Just for clarification, is this a similar situation? It's not. Questions, councillors? No questions? Would someone like to move it? Move to Councillor Lord, second to Councillor Noon. Is there any discussion? There is none. I'm going to put it. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? And that is, are you staying here for the white week? Okay. So we're on to item 23. Sorry, 22. Now, can I just take some guidance here? Tanya, can you come and give me some advice, please?
Post 89.
I'm going to put to council that we invite Mr. Collins, Chair of the Waikowhai Community Board, to the table under our standing orders. If council agrees to that, he is entitled to speak to the issue, although he doesn't have a vote on it. So I'm going to put it that we accept Mr. Collins to the table. Second council stays. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Yes. Carried. Mr. Collins, can I invite you to take one of the two fortuitously empty seats?
I think you've got it.
So, would you like to kick off with any comments, or would you just like to
probably get straight into questions.
This is Councillor Moon. Quite happy for you to participate in any way.
Thank you, Your Worship.
Councillor Carroll.
The initial lease was between whom and whom? Who and whom?
So the initial lease, I believe, was approved by the Department of Lands and Survey. We haven't actually been able to find a copy of the initial lease, however we have found a granting letter. The conditions of that initial lease, we haven't been able to find anything in archives.
You've made a comment about what it said, so I presumed you
We
would know.
commented on the initial granting letter and what that said, which we do have a copy of and I believe was appended to the report.
So the condition was a condition from Dosley or something to us, or who imposed that condition on whom?
The Department of Lands and Survey imposed it through a letter on us. You'll find it's attachment A.
Right, any further questions?
I'm happy to move, Your Worship, when you're ready.
Second.
So it's been moved, Councillor Noon, seconded Councillor Wilson. Councillor Noon, do you wish to speak to it in the first instance?
Just very briefly, the Chair of the Community Board highlighted the partnership that's been going on for quite some time with regards to the felling of these trees, with regards to mitigating the effects of felling the trees, with regards to communicating with the local community, whether it's the neighbours, the local runaka, the wider community, or in fact as well as the Dunedin City Council. And of course the focus on the landscape management plan is something that is important to the community as well. I also need to highlight the board has organised, although Mr Collins didn't mention, several public meetings, at least 2, and a number of times they have communicated progress with the felling of the trees and post-harvesting what was going to happen with the land. So there has been good dialogue, and I also need to acknowledge staff as well. It has been a little bit prickly at times in terms of this particular issue when it was first mooted, the felling of the trees, and staff have been at the thick end of the communication and dialogue with the community, and that has been much appreciated. And the 2 pieces that are now left are essentially at either end of the forest, so to speak. The piece at the northern end is highly valued and used by the local community, and in a recreational sense they are certainly looking forward to post-harvesting and having something that's probably more conducive for enjoying that space in the future.
Councillor McTavish.
I think I'm okay, thank you.
Sorry, no, you don't want us to speak. Councillor Pitt.
Your Worship, it's actually a question. Would that be okay?
That's fine.
I'm just wondering if you have a comment, or Mr Collins might also, about the stability and any possible risk to the dune stability between the time of harvest and the time of re-establishing forest on those dunes.
We've had a full assessment done by, I think it's Dr. Mike Hilton, and he's provided us with a report that outlines that there is very little risk to future movement. Our landscape management plan will also incorporate that as a continuing theme.
Mr Collins, do you wish to make a comment?
Yes, if I can, through the Mayor. The pine plantation with its age and its current state probably poses more threat to the dunes than the removal of the trees themselves. Having enjoyed the local coast yesterday while it was sleeting and raining and walking the beach, as you do on those sorts of days, I am happy to report to Council that the beach is actually showing some sign of accretion of sand at the moment, which is a positive thing. The community have been waiting for the disposal of these trees for some time, as I say, in excess of 30 years. They were planted with a clear intent, and we're asking Council to actually complete that project.
Thank you. Councillor Hawkins.
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. I'd like to propose an amendment to the resolutions that it may be adopted by the mover or not. I've got no issue with the urgency of the harvest or even the community taking a lead role in deciding what happens to the funds. But I do think it might be worth considering amending Part D of the resolution to include a reference to be subject to the parks manager being satisfied that the proposed landscape management plan aligns with relevant elements of the council's strategic framework. Basically, I mean, this is a not insignificant project, and it would be, and there's a fairly broad scope as to how that strategic framework could be met by the landscape management plan. But I think it would be good to have some staff guidance as part of that, working alongside the community as that process is developed to get the best overall strategic outcomes for the money that will be harvested.
Okay. In the first instance,
Your Worship, I think that does make sense. The overall strategic framework should be referred to, and I'm quite happy that that amendment is made.
and seconded.
That's it, as long as the
Yeah,
chair is...
You're happy with it. Mr. Collins, do you have any...
Just through the Mayor, the amendment tends to make perfect sense to myself. Certainly the community board and the community would not want to be heading into a direction that was against council policy, and I'm sure that we wouldn't get a recommendation from staff, as we would expect, to adopt a plan that recommended such an action anyway.
And I think in the context of it was just having completed our environment strategy as part of the strategic framework, it makes perfect sense. Councillor McTavish.
Thank you, Your Worship, and just speaking in favour of the now amended motion, I think the community board should be commended on its work around this to date. I know it's been a tricky process at times. I personally would also just like to reiterate, I guess, the hope that the good engagement with the Runaka continue, given this site is of historical significance to them, both ecologically but also culturally, and I know that they have been very involved to date, but it would be great to see that continue so that it does reflect their ambitions for this site as well. So with that caveat and the new wording, I'm very much in favour.
Thank you. Any further speakers? There being none, I'll invite the mover to exercise your right of reply. There's none. So I'll put it, so it's the recommendations plus the highlighted addition to D, which reads, subject to the Group Manager Parks and Recreation being satisfied that the plan lines with the Council's strategic framework. I'll put it. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Collins. Right, on to item 23, which is the amended proposed dog control policy in bylaw 2016 in keeping with animals excluding dogs and birds bylaw 2016. Welcome, Ms. McGill, Mr. Blair. Is there anything you'd like to lead off before I'll open it up for questions? So, any questions, councillors? Councillor Thompson.
I've got two questions, both of which relate to the proposed intent to trial a 12-month access for dogs in the CBD. My first question is, dogs were banned from the CBD, I couldn't tell you now how many years ago, but I suspect somewhere around 20 years ago. I assume there was a process that took place that enabled that ban, and I wonder whether there was any consideration given by staff to the evidence that led to that decision at that point in time.
Sorry, through the chair. We put out for public consultation, we asked the question whether people would like that opportunity to have access to that area. The answer to your initial question is no, we did not look at that.
And my second question is, what was the nature of staff advice to the panel with regard to whether or not dogs should be reintroduced to the CBD?
The nature of the advice, sorry, Mr.
Did staff provide any advice to the panel on staff views as to whether or not dogs should be reintroduced to the CBD?
We discussed with the panel whether we thought it was a good idea or not, and we thought that it was a good opportunity to see if dog owners could be responsible in that area.
Councillor Pete.
Thank you, Your Worship. And I just a couple of questions. One is about assuming that in some form the bylaw policy will be approved today. But just what staff would anticipate in terms of signage that would be required, particularly if there are changes to be made. I'm just wondering if you could give us an outline of that and the time frame for it.
Okay, we're proposing to introduce the bylaw from 1 July this year, so we'd like that lead up to allow us to put signage in all of the areas that we've made changes to, or any proposed 12-month trial will clearly outline those trials. And so there's the likes of, there's a lot of beaches there's been changes on, and there's been changes out at St Clair Esplanade and through the central city. There'll all be quite clear signage being put up there to make sure that people are aware of what they can and can't do.
And could that be achieved before the 1st of July, or do you think that might take longer?
I'd like to say yes. We certainly intend to do that. Well, that'll be our priority as soon as we walk out of the store. And just on another question, more specifically to do with Chisholm Park Golf Club and the golf course, could you just outline what is being brought forward in terms of where dogs may or may not be exercised there? Yes, so we've had legal advice on that. There's been quite a long discussion, and we have been advised that on the reserve area the dogs are permitted off leash, and on the area closest to the Chisholm Golf Course they must be on a leash, and that is quite clearly outlined in the bylaw.
Fine, and in terms of that close to, this will be apparent from a map?
Yes, we have got a map, and I've asked for the Governor's Support Officer to have that available for councillors to view today, and that is clearly outlined in the map.
Councillor Benson Park.
Thank you, Mr Chair. First question relates to the narrative in the minutes that I raised earlier, and I wonder if my observation in reading the detail of the submissions as they've been recorded there, I failed to find any reference to the issue that Councillor Thompson raised about in that narrative in the minutes about the desirability or otherwise of dogs being allowed in the CBD, in the central activity area. And so I can respond to that also, and also to the fact that in the report later on page 139, you refer to 138 submissions in support of that proposal. Were they independent submissions because they're not referred to in the narrative, or were they a box tick in the consultation form?
The submissions that I refer to are within in attachment C, page 175, where it refers to the number of people that have asked for the option of allowing dogs on a leash in the CBD. And
Well, they have ticked in that box.
Some will have ticked it and some will have commented at the same time.
Can you point me to anywhere in the narrative in the minutes that there's any submission that's referred to in the same respect?
There was a particular submission, and I'd have to go back and look through it, but I remember it quite strongly, where there was a person that was from the university who's doing research wanting to allow access to people with mental health issues, who asked if we could allow special dispensation for people to be able to walk their dogs that weren't special aid dogs. They were just companion, as in the loose word companion dogs, because they liked the idea of being able to come into town with their dog. It gave them confidence to be able to have a companion with them when they were wanting to visit particular areas within the CBD.
Thank you. And thank you also for sending me this morning the copy of the draft statement of proposal. I just wanted to ask, given that on the first page of that, there is a mention of this possibility, George Street, etc., later in the document, but in the 5 bullet points on the covering page, which I think reasonably could be assumed would be what most people would see if they ever got to the document, there's no mention of a proposal like this. Do you think that there's any question that the consultation process is anyway compromised by that omission of this pretty significant change, I think, in the draft statement of proposal?
I probably would like to ask legal advice on that, but I would like to think not, given that we've had it within the proposal document and asked for feedback from it.
Thank you. A couple more, if I may. In terms of the wider dog ownership in the city, can you refresh my memory, please, about the percentage of residents in Dunedin who are dog owners?
I'm struggling on that number, to be honest with you, Mr. Benson-Pope. I'd have to go back. I know that we've got 13,500 registered dog owners, and that equates to approximately 17,000 dogs in the city.
So the number of registered dog owners is 13,000 in a population of 100 and several. Thank you. Next question. A couple of proposals suggest a trial of some kind, and a 12-month trial. Can you explain how the review would happen at the end of that period, should that proceed?
We propose that we will have an enforcement and monitoring program in place by 1 July to be able to observe as to how the dog owners are actually managing this and being responsible. At the end of that, we would have to then decide through legal advice if we needed to go out for special consultative procedure, if it had a significant impact or not.
So there would be another whole process similar to this triggered by a review of that kind?
Potentially, yes, just for that particular area, yes.
Thank you. In the minutes that I referred to earlier, I noticed there are a large number of submissions that talk about the desirability in the really fraught area of the sports fields, the desirability of exercising dogs off-leash because they can't be properly exercised on-leash. And I found that somewhat counterintuitive, given that situation, that the dog has to be off the leash to get decent exercise, to suggest that we should change the rules to allow them to be walked in George Street, given that they can't be not attended and they can't be off the leash, and there are very few commercial premises that would welcome them in their shops or cafes. I wonder if you could respond to that.
Sorry, so I don't quite understand what you're asking, Mr. Benson-Pope, sorry.
There's a lot of comment in the narrative from the submissions that dogs need to be off the leash on sports fields because otherwise they can't get properly exercised. And so can you explain to me why you would bother introducing the issue of having them on a leash in George Street, not getting proper exercise when they can't be left unattended and they can't be taken into the premises and they can't travel on public transport?
I'd like to suggest that they're two separate issues. One is on a sports field is for exercise in particular. The other issue is access to the CBD, that people want to be able to walk with their dog to go and visit somebody, have a coffee out in the Octagon if they're permitted by the operator to sit down and have a drink.
It really relates to my comment earlier, and not dissimilar to the question that Councillor Thompson raised. Were there any submissions from commercial operators, shop owners of any kind about their views about this proposal?
No, there were not.
Have you given any thought to why that might be? Is it because they're entirely supportive of it, or perhaps they have no idea about it until they read about it in the OGT?
What we intend to do is to make sure that we have a conversation with the CBD operators to make sure that they're aware that it's only a trial and that we will be enforcing it very strictly.
Councillor Kelp.
All right.
Thank you. I've now got an email through to answer my question.
Councillor Hawkins.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm interested in, is there a difference between the definition of commercial areas in the proposed policy and what we refer to as the central activity zone?
There is particular roads that we look at for the CBD, and that is through the central George Street and the Octagon and around that particular area there, and then there's also down at the South Dunedin Main Street area is also part of the CBD.
Is there a difference between the CBD and the central activity zone?
I don't know what the definition for the central activity zone is. So that's we've got roads listed on the map as to clearly define what the CBD is.
Yeah, I mean, the central activity zone is a planning designation. I just wonder whether it's confusing if we have different definitions of what our central business district or central activity zone is in different policies, and whether thought had been given to aligning these. That's all the question was. I have a question around the proposal to make it compulsory to visibly carry bags. Is the intention of that so as to enable self-appointed volunteer park rangers to be able to harass someone for not carrying a bag present? I mean, is that you see that as an enforceable proposal, the visibly carrying of a plastic bag on a DCC sports field?
I'd see it has two reasons. One is that the officer, when passing the dog owner, can see that they're actually making the effort to have a bag and carry it with them. They don't have to ask them if they've got one, because legally they must have one. And the second one would be just to encourage people to think about carrying a bag so that they're aware of it.
And just lastly, on the proposal to allow dogs off lead outside of the marked area and have them on lead inside of the marked area. Is that not the proposal?
No, sorry, no, that's not the proposal. Do you want me to elaborate?
Yeah, please do.
So that we had quite a strong number of submissions in regards to this, and they did point out that the responsible dog owners are already being responsible, and those that generally aren't probably won't be abiding by us asking them to be on the lead all the time. So what we've put forward today is that we have dogs on a lead on sports grounds if there are games being played. They can be off a lead on a sports ground around the marked area. At all times they must stay away from the marked area. They can't go within the marked area at all times. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and are staff confident that that is more likely than, or more effective than, say, having a smoke-free section in a restaurant? I mean, what confidence do we have that the dogs of Dunedin will respect the boundary markings of the sports fields?
We need to be able to give the dog owner some responsibility. We have got dog animal service officers delegated to particular parks, and they are regularly visiting these areas. So there'll be signage, and we will ask other dog owners to encourage those that aren't complying, would adopt a dog, adopt a park philosophy, as some of them brought up in the submissions. So we're going to ask them for their help as well.
Councillor McTavish.
Thank you, Worship. A couple of questions. And thank you, Ros, for your response to the questions I sent through this morning, including that map which assisted. I'm just a little bit unclear though. It seems that there are a number of reasonably popular beaches and areas that aren't listed either in the appendix of the schedules of the actual bylaw or on the virtual map. And I just wondered about the status of those. So in places like Long Beach and Purakonui Beach, they don't appear to be listed. I know that dogs are walked there, but it doesn't seem to be giving people guidance as to whether or not they ought to be on a lead. They are penguin hotspots. Long Beach is also not there, Canoe Beach is not there, and there seems to be no reference to Ross Creek Reservoir, and despite the fact that there have been issues up there with dogs.
So I think there is some fine-tuning of the map yet to be made. The intention of the bylaw itself is that you can have your dog pretty much anywhere on a lead, unless otherwise specified within the schedule or in Schedule E on the map. So we've been working on that over the last couple of weeks, and I think there is some maps or some areas that we need to address, and I think Long Beach possibly is one. The idea is that if there's no prohibited markings on those areas, you are permitted your dog on a leash in that area. However, if they are permitted off a leash, then we need to address that if it's not been outlined on the map as yet. So that could be Long Beach. I think they probably are permitted off a leash.
So basically, if it's not in Schedule D, i.e. prohibited areas, and it's not listed in Schedule C, which are hunting permits required, and it's not listed in Schedule B, which is permitted to be off a leash, then effectively they're allowed, but they need to be on a leash.
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
But I admit that there is definitely some fine-tuning that's required on that map before the 1st of July.
Yeah, okay, thank you. My second question actually relates to cats. I sent through the question this morning about the Wellington City Council work that's currently going on, noting that cats was a reasonably strong theme in the submissions, I think, heard by the committee. Certainly looking at the minutes, that seems to be the case, and the supporting documentation that outlines the content of the submissions. And I just wondered, I know you were going away to see if you could talk to someone in Wellington City this morning. Have you had any advice around what provisions they are employing around the microchipping proposal?
I have had discussions with them, and I was hoping that Christy would be here to assist me on the response to this question. I know that there is Section 145 of the Local Government Act that only permits us to propose a bylaw in regards to protecting public health and also preventing a nuisance. However, Section 146 also then moves into the regulation of animals, and it may be that they're actually using that 146 in regards to the regulation of the number of cats and also microchipping. It does quite clearly in their legal advice, which I can provide you with a copy with, outline the fact that they are unable to protect wildlife under this bylaw. And we have had quite a clear direction from the legal team that it really is the Reserves Act that should be protecting wildlife in relation to cats. And look, she just walked in just at the right time. Christy, if you could just follow on our discussion today regarding the LGA and enforcement of cats and the Resource Act, the Reserves Act, please.
So have you outlined anything?
I'll just cover off what you.
So last year on the 9th of December I provided a legal opinion which outlined the basis, and actually I think it was presented to Council as part of its agenda when the statement of proposal was first brought. Basically that opinion concludes that we need to have a focus on the role of Council when we're making bylaws, and that role is set out in the Local Government Act, and that does include the control of keeping of animals in the region, or in the district, sorry. Basically the core focus of Council's functions, or your greatest functions, rest within the Reserves Act in terms of the purpose or intent of protecting wildlife from cats, because as I'd outlined in my earlier advice, the purpose of local government doesn't include protecting other animals. That purpose is restricted to the full well-beings of local government. So what that advice concluded was that there were some powers to control the keeping of animals, including cats, and basically that opinion said that in terms of a microchipping system, and the advice reads, unlike dogs, there is no legislation prescribing that cats must wear or be fitted with identifying information. So dogs do have their own legislation that requires that. And then I've concluded no legislation expressly permits Council to pass a bylaw for the purpose of microchipping cats. And what I'm referring to there more generally is implementing a microchipping system for cats. So that includes the fitting of a collar or the fitting of a chip underneath the skin, the regulatory powers to enforce owners to carry out that step, any infringement system required to enforce that step of putting the microchip under the skin. Now, I've just been made aware in the last hour of some advice that's gone to Wellington City Council, and although I haven't had an opportunity to fully review it, that advice concludes that it is possible under the Local Government Act to require the microchipping of cats. They don't explain the basis for their opinion, but I think the difference between us is simply that basically they don't go on to look at that wider microchipping regulatory regime, and they stop their opinion just at the sole question of can you insert a microchip into a cat as part of your bylaw. So my advice is looking at that more broadly, and do you have regulatory and enforcement powers to implement a microchipping system? And as far as I can see from the Wellington advice, they don't go that far. And my research found that because there are no infringement notice powers available currently to councils under the LGA, it's not possible for the council to issue an infringement notice as part of a microchipping program. And so therefore my original advice stands that we would need legislation to introduce a microchipping system. But if you're looking for the sole purpose of microchipping itself, and you're not intending to enforce that, then that power is available to the council through a bylaw. However, it's still, and the advice in Wellington is the same on this point, it is still necessary for the council to consider whether passing a bylaw of that kind is appropriate and necessary. And my advice is that if you don't have the regulatory powers to enforce the regulatory regime, it's not necessary or appropriate at this stage because Parliament hasn't given councils the power, unlike the cases with dogs, to implement that system at this stage. Sorry, that's a very long-winded, off-the-cuff answer.
Yep, no, thank you, and thank you for following up with Wellington City this morning. I guess two questions flow from that. Is it likely that Wellington City is going to get to the point of having consulted on this and discover that they are consulting on an unimplementable bylaw?
I can't comment, but it would be, the advice doesn't include information about the regulatory regime.
And the second question, I guess, relates, I'm sorry, you'll have to bear with me while I just find relevant part of the minutes. So to quote from the minutes on page 51 of 201, submitted Ms. Alison Thornton, talking about the fact that unneutered cats and stray feral cats were posing a danger to companion cats and the danger of spreading things such as feline AIDS. She considered that neutering a cat and returning it to a colony amounted to cruelty. She supported limiting the number of cats a person could own and noted that colonies attracted stray cats. She talked about the fact that microchipping would place responsibility on the cat's original owner and would reduce the number of stray cats. To me, this is an example of a constituent who is raising issues around public nuisance caused by stray cats and proposing that by microchipping cats, that public nuisance would be reduced by virtue of the fact that cats would be identified and returned to their owners rather than perhaps going on a stray rampage and turning into colonies, etc., etc. does your original advice stand that there is no way that stray cats can be clearly identified under the LGA as posing a public nuisance under that section 145? Or is this an example of a constituent who is reporting a public nuisance in the form of stray cats and suggesting microchipping as a solution to that?
Referring to whether or not the Wellington legal advice adds anything further to that assessment that I'd made earlier. I think I originally did accept that cats can be a nuisance. It's simply that the bylaw needs to meet the test of appropriate, reasonable and necessary in order to control that risk. And I recall giving the advice at that time that the statement of proposal was proposed that in this instance, Council would need to give very careful consideration to whether the scale of the problem and the impact of the problem warranted the use of a bylaw in this instance.
Thank you. So, were Council, having received the feedback from constituents like that of Ms Thornton, to conclude that it was indeed a significant hazard or public nuisance, these stray cats, and that doing an assessment of the appropriate mechanisms that could be in place to respond to that public nuisance, that microchipping was indeed one of the most efficient ways of dealing with that issue, then quite possibly under the LGA it would be possible for us to implement a bylaw requiring microchipping.
Possible for you to implement a bylaw that requires microchipping, but not possible for you to enforce it. You won't have, other than by way of prosecuting the owner of a person that fails to microchip or hasn't microchipped their own cat. The instance of public nuisances that you referred to does involve feral or stray cats, and in those instances microchipping wouldn't be used as a technique because there'd be no owner to pay for it or to ensure that the chipping was put in place. So in terms of stray and feral cats, there would still be an issue of public nuisance remaining. The chip simply links the animal to the owner, and that gives you an address to serve proceedings or infringement notice or education material. Councillors should also be aware that, or turn their minds to, other techniques that are available for controlling public nuisances, pest control in terms of reserves and park areas within our reserves management strategy, public education campaigns, and I think also other organisations, Ros, correct me if I'm wrong, such as SPCA and vet clinics offer de-sexing programs for free. So all of those techniques are available in addition to the bylaws. So Council, it must satisfy itself that it's necessary to go beyond those already existing practical methods and take that extra step to pass a bylaw to that effect.
One further question, Your Worship, and it's for Ros. Ros, of the range of different possible measures which have just been outlined by Ms Rusher, are there any that Council aren't yet employing that could potentially employ to address the issue, the public nuisance caused by stray and feral cats?
We are currently handling it under the Health Act. Within the bylaw, they shouldn't be creating a nuisance under the current bylaw that we've got for keeping of animals. And if, for example, we have a person that has been feeding feral cats, stray cats, and they're causing a nuisance in the area, we are able to issue a health order and prosecute that person if required, or we can actually, if we can't find an owner for those cats, we can actually get a pest contractor in to remove them and destroy them humanely.
So currently Council then is employing some form of public education campaign. It does have provisions and regulatory provisions in place to pick up those where there is a specific issue. It is doing, I think, pest control in some parts of the network, We have got a relationship with the SPCA who do a neutering and return campaign. So all of those things are currently in place, and we are still getting feedback from our community saying that stray cats, feral cats, are causing public nuisance.
I don't disagree with you, Ms McTavish, that there is an issue in regards to stray and feral cats, and we are quite limited into what we can do. The SPCA did have a capture, neuter and release program, but they no longer do that. They don't want to be associated with the euthanizing of healthy animals. So we are dealing more so with problems with feral cats. We're getting calls from the environmental health staff. I also think that we could be doing more in regards to education and promotion of responsible cat ownership.
Councillor Wilson.
Thank you. I just want to ask a couple of questions on, I always have a slight nervousness of including prohibited areas in a bylaw, which is a process to change, when we don't control the land or what is in it. So you've got included as prohibited part of the rail trail, you've got prohibited on the map, which includes the whole part of the rail trail through the Dunedin area, and on the website DOC have said it's available for dogs that are uncontrolled, and I'm just not quite sure which one's correct. But so if we don't control an area, is it sensible for us to have them listed in a bylaw as anything? I mean, shouldn't we just refer to a current list rather than actually having them stated in the bylaw? It's just a nervousness I have.
Thank you for picking that up, Ms Wilson. If that's the case, I'll amend that section. But there are some areas, for example, there's the forestry, where we are not saying that dogs can't be there, but it's the private owner's responsibility to notify the dog owners of that. But they must be on a lead if they enter that property, if they've got permission.
Yes. I suppose it's just the process by which, and they're put in the schedules, I think that makes them, and I might want to check with the legal team, but I think that makes them part of the bylaw, whereas I think it would have to be changed in the same process, which is slightly fraught. I'm just wondering if there's a better way of listing those schedules, even by date. That adds a certain date there, that's the status. Yeah.
Okay, we'll definitely look into that.
Councillor Thompson.
Just a couple of technical questions. If the proposal to have a 12-month trial for George Street is approved, how is that handled within the context of a bylaw? If in 12 months' time it was determined that it was in fact not a good decision, what happens then?
If it's not a good decision, did you say? Sorry?
Well, it's specifically being presented to us here as a 12-month trial. It's not written into the bylaw as a 12-month trial. So I've made an assumption that if in 12 months' time it was determined by whoever that in fact it was a remarkably stupid idea and we want to end the trial, how do we do that within the context of the bylaw? Do we have to start a bylaw process all over again?
We'd have to decide whether it had a significant impact, and if it did, then yes, we would have to look at that particular aspect of the bylaw and go through the consultation process.
Thank you.
Councillor Peake.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just teasing a little more about the term public nuisance and the legislation that refers to it, apart from the Health Act, as we've heard from Ms McGill. I wondered if Ms Russia would like to explain how public nuisance appears in the Local Government Act, I think, does it, or the Reserves Act, and how we can rely on that to do anything in terms of cats.
To refer you to the legislation, but basically I think it's section 146 or 145 of the Local Government Act, which lists the purposes for which a bylaw may be passed, and one of those is a purpose which is connected to protecting people or the public from nuisance.
Is nuisance defined in any way in terms of animals, stray animals, or feral?
I could probably speak to that, Christy, because I've been looking at it quite closely this morning. No, nuisances from the Wellington's legal advice, they do say that it is not defined It just says protecting public from nuisance.
Thank you. And just on to another topic, the St Clair situation. I just wonder if Ms McGill could explain or clarify just where dogs on a leash could go and where they are not permitted to go.
Sure. They are permitted on the paved area on a leash, only on a leash. They're not permitted in the playground, that area near the playground. They're not also permitted on the St Clair beach outside of, they are permitted between the hours of 8 p.m. and 8 a.m. in the morning. Outside of those hours, they're not permitted in that area.
And under the current bylaw, what is the situation?
Currently the beach is still the same, but the paved area, they're prohibited from that area as well. They're only allowed limited access to Middle Beach, which correct me if I'm wrong, but the access is not that easy currently.
Okay. I'm not sure if there are any other questions, but I'm prepared to move.
Right, well, I'll take that, but there's another question and I'll come back to you. Councillor Hawkins.
Yeah, thank you, Worship. Just picking up on Councillor Thompson's question around a review, should that be deemed worthy in 12 months' time. How long ago did staff begin work on this current review of the dog control bylaw? How long has it taken us to get to this point?
2 years.
So it conceivably could be a 12-month trial and then a 2-year process to get to the point where we could review it.
I would hope that it wouldn't take that long, because this has been a full review of the whole bylaw plus there's 2 bylaws that we've reviewed here. I wouldn't think one particular item within the bylaw would take that long. I would envisage 6 months.
Thank you. And just a question for Ms Rusher. A lot of the legal advice is focused on the Local Government Act and what we can and can't do under that, and that makes sense from a whole of city point of view. But under the Reserves Act, and we do have a significant amount of reserve land, do we have greater regulatory or enforcement powers under the Reserves Act, and could we make a bylaw to give effect to its purpose under dealing with these similar issues?
So we have focused on the Local Government Act because this is the council has a separate reserves bylaw. At the moment, that bylaw doesn't address the protection of wildlife from cats, but it is coming up for review, and I understand a paper is about to be presented to council. There are also provisions in our reserve management strategies which deal with the issues around feral cats or stray cats, and management and control of and protection of wildlife in reserve areas. So we do have some other techniques in place, and they'll be before council for review. I'm not sure what date, unfortunately.
Thank you. That's helpful to know that we are reviewing that policy. What enforcement options do we have under that policy? And in terms of were we to defer this conversation to be a part of that bylaw review?
So a consequence under the Reserves Act is that the council can seize an animal that's trespassing within a reserve area, because of course that goes to the fundamental purpose of protecting wildlife. It can then, if it can't identify an owner, destroy the animal or contain it and confine it and sell it, depending on what type of animal, because of course it's not just specific to cats, it can be dogs, it can be horses, it can be stock. The Reserves Act deals with a range of animals.
And similar to the marking of a sports field, animals generally don't give particular reference to where the edges and boundaries of our reserves are. So could you not, in terms of giving effect to the Reserves Act, is there no scope under the Local Government Act from a, let's say from a halo point of view, to move in directions that give effect to the purpose of the Reserves Act? That doesn't make it, I'm aware that was jumbled, but I guess what I'm trying to say is the Reserves Act deals with with reserves. Is it outside of the scope of the Local Government Act, in your opinion, to propose a bylaw that gives greater, it reinforces the purpose of the Reserves Act by providing buffer areas, for example, or halo areas around reserves as scheduled.
So I think we come back to the reserves legislation applying simply to the boundaries, the strict legal boundaries of the reserve, and the full purposes of, or the purposes of bylaws that are listed in the Local Government Act. And the Local Government Act does not list protection of wildlife as one of the purposes for passing a bylaw, so we are within that constraint. On a practical level, the council can manage reserves or manage the buffer areas within a reserve by expanding the reserve boundary if it wanted to create a softer zone, but it would require you to apply the Reserves Act powers and have it's the land with the status of reserve, which won't be practical necessarily on a urban fringe.
Councillor Wilson, do you have a question?
Sorry, it's probably a question for legal advice, and I know I raised this when this first went out, because I know I raised things about on dock land then, but I just probably want to understand under the Local Government Act why we have got so much dock land covered in a policy about control of DCC land or in the public domain, and I'm having a real problem understanding why we're covering off a whole lot of dock land when they've got their own policy process, which isn't ours. And so I'm not quite sure if that's for you or for the legal team, whether we've actually got powers to do it under dock land.
To be honest with you, Councillor Winston, I'd need to check that, but I think that we're doing it because it's part of our area and we need to inform the dog owners that they're not permitted to be there.
Sorry, under the Local Government Act, it is our job to tell them what they're allowed to do on other people's land.
We're actually operating under the Dog Control Act for this particular item that you're talking about.
Yeah, but also under the Local Government Act, in that we're having, as we will do on everything, almost, no, just sort of totally under the dog control, and therefore we can go broader than what we normally look under local control. Okay, I'm still having problems with that. The Act.
So the dog control, the purpose of the Dog Control Act is allows the local authority to make a bylaw, particularly for the area, to inform dog owners of where they can and can't, for one item, where they can and can't access areas of that particular city.
Okay, that's the questions. Councillor Thompson.
I apologise. I knew when I was sitting down that I did have something else to ask and I'd forgotten it. It's probably more appropriately addressed to the chair of the hearings panel, but in the determination to suggest a 12-month trial, was any consideration given as to what the criteria would be for evaluating the success or otherwise of that trial?
Not specifically, but Ros,
yeah, I'm happy to speak to that, Councillor Thompson. We would be looking at the breaching of the bylaw or any conditions within the bylaw. We would be expecting the dog owners to be responsible. One of the main things that we're asking them to do is to always have it on a lead and not leave it unattended. And if there's any fouling, that'll be the areas that we'll be looking at. And of course, if there is any incidents of concern.
Well, there inevitably will be fouling, so I guess the criteria I'm really asking, I'm not trying to be facetious here, I'm really trying to, at what point does, how do you define the point at which you determine that there is a problem? And if you're going to have a trial, it seems to me you have to have some definition that you're going to evaluate that against. That's a very subjective definition that you're using.
I'd like to think that we would be able to decide at the end of the 12 months whether it's been failure or not. And at this stage we haven't developed our enforcement management plan in regards to this area, but that will be taken into consideration before the 1st of July as to what we're looking at. It would be quite clear as to what the outcome is expected.
And my other question is really with regard to process. I'm just not quite clear how, I'm seeking some advice as to how one handles voting on this if you don't wish to vote against the entire bylaw, but you wish to vote against one part of it. And to move an amendment to have that part changed would be the direct opposite of the intention of the motion, and I don't think I'm allowed to do that. So how does one how does one address that?
So you want to...
Well, quite specifically,
You want to vote against one part of the bylaw?
yes, but it isn't a part because it's not. You can't point to it in the motion. It's the absence of something. There is nothing in the policy that says there will be a 12-month trial in George Street. So therefore, your only way of registering a concern about that particular aspect is to vote against the whole thing, or to move that an amendment, which is that the CBD be reintroduced to Schedule D, but that's a direct contravention, directly opposite of the motion. So
just to be clear, the intention to run a trial is not part of the bylaw.
No.
Right.
Could we have a recess to...
Just a minute.
Just remove those restrictions.
Sandy, could I get some advice here? My feeling is that that the policy around running a trial, if it's not part of the bylaw, then we can vote against it separately. We can raise the issue separately.
Yes, okay. Well, the point is there's nothing to vote against. There's nothing to vote against.
No, but you could simply move a motion saying that you wish to move a motion telling the staff not to run a trial.
Mr. Chairman?
Well, then all you'd be doing is saying that you're permanently cementing this in place. The only way that I can see to address it is to be able to move an amendment to have it put back into the schedule.
Right.
Yeah, sorry.
Just to, in response to that, Mr. Chairman, just to alert people that I've sent Ms. Jordan exactly that amendment, and I think that would solve the issue.
Right, so can I just take time to find out what that is? And yeah, so that would be a subsequential motion because the policy to run a trial is not part of the bylaw, so we can confirm the bylaw because it doesn't mention it, and then this is a subsequential motion that we can discuss and vote on.
Well, it's an amendment to the approval of the bylaws, Mr. Chairman.
Well, if the policy's to run a trial in George Street is not part of the bylaw, then we can confirm the bylaw because it is, I suspect, inadvertently being left out of it. Sandy.
No.
I'll move that we adjourn for 5 minutes. Second, Councillor Staines. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Yes, carried. Right, councillors, we will resume. This one's sorted. Right, we're back to where we were. Now, Councillor Peters indicated that, just so everyone knows what the process is proposed to be, well, let's see if it works out that way. Councillor Pete has is ready to move the recommendations as they are, and then I know that Councillor Benson Pope will move an amendment, and we will things panning out, we'll discuss that and then come back to the resolution as either amended or not. So, is there a seconder for Councillor Pete's? Is it Councillor Kelly? So, Councillor Pete, can I?
Sorry to interrupt. But there is actually, apart from moving the recommended resolutions A to G rather, there is an H that I've been made aware of and am happy to add. Although it's not part of the bylaw situation, it is to do with the debate, or at least the questions and the responses to do with cats control, feral and stray cats. So that would be, it's coming up on the screen now, in terms of reviewing what we could do about that and receiving a report about it.
Sorry, I'm Elliot. Maybe Councillor McTavish would like to second that.
No, hang on. I have of a mind to take this separately because it doesn't, you know, it's not part of a dog thing, different animal. So let's resolve this, and then I'm very happy to come back to that. So could you switch back to the in due course? So the recommendations here have been moved by Councillor Peet, seconded by Councillor Calvert, and I'll invite Councillor Peet to speak to that in the first instance.
Thank you, Your Worship. It's been raining cats and dogs for 2 days. And I'm reminded as we're going through the questions that the permutations that you could place on such a bylaw as this are quite staggering, really, in terms of where dogs may go, whether they're on a leash, off a leash, and so on. But let me just say that, you know, it's the current bylaw has been in place for 10 years, and the review, as Ros just says, has happened over a period of 10 years rather, and the review has happened over a period of the last 2 years. It is, of course, the bylaw is accompanied by a statement of policy as well, which was also consulted on. I want to first of all pay tribute to the staff, to Ros McGill and Peter Hanlon, who's with us today, as well as for her advice, Christy Rusher and Richard Saunders. I think those of us on the panel, and included Councillors Lord and Hall, found the process robust enough, I think, and certainly it was a process in which the staff and ourselves had a meeting of minds, persuaded to some extent by the 387 submissions. What the process, however, showed up as well was an issue because of the 60 people who asked to be heard, only 40 turned up. Most of the no-shows had no apology or never advised us. What they were influenced by, according to the feedback I was getting, was the publicity that preceded the hearings and the deliberations. And the publicity talked about, especially headlines, sort of hinted at predetermination that the staff recommendations would carry the day, and that the hearing was just simply a formality to rubber stamp. As you would know, we, our 3 councillors arrived at the hearing with an open mind, with no predetermination, and certainly were prepared to listen to those submitters who wanted to be heard. Dunedin was cast by quite a number of them as a city unfriendly to dogs. That's what we heard from a substantial number, compared to cities in the north. I think it was more a perception, however, than an actual reality in terms of the way northern cities have a dog control policy and bylaw, because many of the restrictions that we were placing were also to be found in those northern cities. What also came through was that I think the previous bylaw process did not recognise the positive contribution that dogs can make to the social well-being, to the fact that they are often seen, for example, on sports fields more commonly than even the sports codes themselves, the games that are played on those sports fields. More use is made continuously on a number of our parks and sports fields by dog owners exercising their dogs. So we had a number of submissions, and one especially from Catherine Smith, which is on page 55, talking about her research into the way dogs are an important component of a society, and that they can make, because of their companion status, a very positive contribution. However, saying that, dogs are a commitment, and they are quite definitely a responsibility. And I think coming to this table, the hearings panel and staff on one mind have, as you can see, decided, in fact came to the conclusion that we ought to be easing some restrictions in some areas, but tightening up on others, and particularly around the wildlife protection side of things. The hottest topic, of course, as Mr. Gill has said, was to do with the sports fields and to what extent we would allow dogs to be exercised there. You've heard the explanation that we're making no change in terms of those marked areas, that they should be kept free of dogs, but outside that, they may be, outside the marked areas, they may be exercised off the leash. The CBD, South Dunedin, and nobody's mentioned yet the cemeteries, but they are proposed as trials, 12 months trials, in terms of being able for dog owners to be able to take their pets there on a leash. It is consistent with some other jurisdictions, and certainly overseas you see that. Quite commonly dogs are allowed, and I'm just thinking of our own CBD, and in terms of, you see on a daily basis dogs there, but they are ones, generally speaking, they will be ones which are to do with disability, for disability purposes, particularly of course those people who are visually impaired. The question of bags has come up, and whether it's a reasonable thing for people to not only carry, which is what's in the present bylaw, but also to display. And that is something that is the provision which you do find in northern cities, and is very much accepted there, and very much, I think, something that we should carry into this new bylaw. The fact that they could clearly visibly display a bag would be an indication of their responsibility to pick up poo. As one of the submitters said, yeah, there are people about, and they are a minority, too posh to pick up. And that is very unfortunate, and we're told time and again by the submitters that we shouldn't punish every dog owner because a few don't pick up after their dog. So I think that we should be very clearly asking dog owners to display. All they need to do is just kind of tie the plastic bag around the leash or around the collar, or at least carry it so we can see it. That would indicate that they are not too posh to pick up. The wildlife situation, that has changed because we're asking dog owners to keep their dogs at least 20 metres clear of protected wildlife, and by that I mean quite clearly Dunedin is in a particularly vulnerable situation with its sea lions, its fur seals, its yellow-eyed and little blue penguins on many of our beaches, and so we have a particular issue with that. The rule is in the past has been 10 metres, and we're suggesting doubling of that. A number of submitters who are particularly concerned about wildlife protection asked us to go to 30 or 50 metres or even more. But our view in the end was that doubling to 20, I think most people can sort of guess where 20 metres might be. But when you start talking 30 or 50, it's a bit harder. And in any event, this is mainly to do with beaches, and to get access, that's 20 metres clear of some wildlife that may be seen there, is going to be hard. And then, yeah. So anyway, we've made some changes and suggested changes, obviously recommended only at this point, but around beaches, such as Smales, for example, and a number of other ones. Brighton is one as well. At Smales, which has an increasing sort of presence of little penguins, little blue penguins, and also sea lions, we've recommended that the beach be divided in half. So when you go through the main entrance there, you turn right and you can have your dog off the leash. If you turn left, on the leash. It's somewhat similar to what we have at Allen's Beach, where if you go out the only entrance, you cannot turn left with a dog. You can only go to the right. So there's an analogy there. I think the maps that will be accompanying the bylaw are extremely important. A map is going to be more understood, I think, than any kind of paragraph that tries to describe where dogs are meant to be or not to be, with or without leash. And education and training, I think here this is part of what we would hope that dog owners would take particular note of, and that is in terms of attending training courses if they haven't been, in terms of how to have dogs well managed and well behaved, and certainly take their responsibility in that area very seriously. Cats, I mean, this wasn't actually, this bylaw is not about cats. I wish there was a cat control act. There isn't. And that's why we get this debate and discussion going on about how far and to what extent and how much law do we have around it that will help us control cats better than we do now. Certainly there needs to be particular actions, and if we can take them to do with the stray and the feral cats that we find in our environment, then that should be limited, and the subsequent motion that you've heard of now will try to at least get our head around that. I think the consultation that asked questions about the cats, and that certainly got a big strong response from dog owners, and I think we've started a public opinion momentum in favour of doing something in the future. Wellington is leading the way with its microchipping and perhaps registration as well of cats, but nonetheless I think the day will come when there is some serious control on cats, because in a city that calls itself the wildlife capital of New Zealand, we have some real issues, I think, in terms of cats and how they're controlled. So, Your Worship, I do, I think this process has been well run. I mean, this has generated a lot of letters to the editor and column inches in our newspapers, but we're getting to a point now where I think we have a better looking bylaw, one that's more friendly to dogs, but not over friendly. One that where there are still restrictions, and in terms of particularly the wildlife areas, there are more restrictions around where dogs can go or not go, and I think that's really important. Thank you.
Councillor Betts.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to move the amendment that's on the board. I'd like to add, in doing so, I'd like to add my thanks to Councillor Peat and the panel. There's no doubt that discussions about animals, especially dogs, create more interest and more heat than a lot of the discussions we have around the table, and I guess this discussion is demonstrating exactly that. It's already taken a lot more time than the balance of the meeting. I think what was interesting was the breadth of the comment that was made in the submissions, as have been read by everyone. And I guess one of the things about consultations like this, that it does raise in the community pretty much everything really, short of nuclear war, was one way or another alluded to in the submissions. And I think the panel need to be, and staff need to be congratulated for working their way through all that. I think the decisions that have been made about sports fields, about backbench Port Chalmers and so on, about St Clair Esplanade, which has long been a problem in terms of access to the beach and is even more so now, and in terms of wildlife, as alluded to, are entirely sensible, and the committee needs to be congratulated on that. The one issue that I'm really concerned about is obvious, and that's in respect of the level of consultation, through no criticism of the committee or the process, but I'm not sure that people largely affected by what's proposed in terms of the central business area have any idea really about what's proposed. The thing that bothers me there is that 138 people more or less ticked a box or made a submission. That's 138 out of the 13,000 dog owners in the city. That's 0.01% of the dog owner population. And that's therefore 0.001% of the population of the city. And I don't think that's a good basis to make a public policy change of this kind. I think proposing a change allowing dogs other than the assistance dogs that are already approved in the central business districts would be creating an issue where a problem doesn't currently exist. And I think it's a bit counterintuitive in a wider environment where there's an ever-increasing concern about the behaviour of dangerous dogs and dog attacks from dogs that wouldn't have been anticipated to be dangerous previously, where there's a wider concern about that to be more liberal in terms of the central city area. So I think I'll leave it at that. I'm hoping people will widely support the changes because I think they're good, but I think the extension to a change in George Street and the central business area is not sensible and would be very poor policy making. I can't help think of what's proposed as other than a Clayton's solution where you can't get there by public transport, but if you do get your dog to George Street, you can walk along, but you can't let it go, you can't leave it unattended, and by the way, you'd better not go into any of the shops with your animal. So I'm not sure what would be achieved by a change of that kind without even raising the issues that Councillor Thompson, that have been traversed earlier, about how we get ourselves out of deciding whether a trial was successful or not, given the time that it took to get to this point that Councillor Hawkins has already alerted us to.
Thank you. Okay, so there's an amendment and Councillor Thompson seconding it, I take it. Do you wish to speak to it? Sorry?
And I'll speak to it. Look, I endorse obviously what Councillor Benson Pope has had to say, and particularly with regard to the committee's work. I think when you charge a committee with doing a job, you've got to really feel strongly to then challenge the outcome of that work. And in this case I do, and it's really because I have worked on George Street for 30 years, and I know what it was like when dogs were allowed there before. And I think that the panel, in these extraordinarily litigious times, one has to be very careful what one says about one's fellow councillors. So I'm hasten to add, I think the panel's got it largely right. But with respect to understanding shopping, I'm just not sure that the retailers of George Street celebrate with excitement when the names Hall, Pete and Lord come up in conversation. Mike taking his dog shopping involves putting it on the back of the ute when he's going to Wrightson's. But I can tell you what it was like on George Street previously. It's about gagging while you're trying to clean up a particularly revolting dog turd outside your shop. It's about the hairdresser next door every second morning carting out buckets of soapy hot water and a scrubbing brush to clean up first thing in the morning so it doesn't end up inside her shop or whatever. It's about elderly and partially sighted or blind people not knowing what they're going to walk in. And it's not, I'm a dog owner, I've got 3 of them. I have to be certified to keep 3. I probably need certifying for having 3. And I love dogs, but it's, by and large, this is not the group of people who took their dogs to George Street. What came to George Street before was studded collars, and that was usually on the people holding the leads. What you had was young testosterone males taking their muscle dogs down to town to impress God knows who, and scaring the living daylights out of other people. I walk my dogs in Roslyn. It's a leafy suburb. We discuss Wordsworth at Rhubarb on a Saturday morning. And I can tell you the dog turd around Roslyn from the good people of Roslyn is a lot. It doesn't get picked up. The difference is that when I'm walking my dog around Roslyn, I'm generally the only person on the footpath. I'm not looking straight ahead to see who I'm going to run into, which is what I'm doing on George Street. So I just think that this is failing to understand why we made a decision. And I say, I don't recall how long ago it was. I suspect about 20 years, maybe a bit less. Why we made a decision to stop doing it was because in those allegedly more responsible times, the reality was that the people who took their dogs to town, a bit like the ones who took their guns to town in Western songs, they just aren't the people we're talking about here, and the mess they left behind was significant, and I don't want to go back there. So I really urge people to support this amendment and not take us back to that situation.
Now, Councillor Kell next, and just reminding everyone, we are now speaking to the amendment, not the main motion. Councillor Kell.
I'm concerned for democracy when we look at proposing an amendment to a bylaw that's been properly looked at over days and genuinely by the people that we chose to look at that bylaw. If there was reasons being proposed why we would not accept their recommendation, which involved something that has come to our attention that wasn't coming to the attention of the staff and recommendations or suggestions to the people who had the bylaw, it may be different for me. But it is a serious concern to me that a suggestion that we would not, without that sort of major issue, listen to the people who listened to the people on this and any other bylaws seems to me inappropriate. It's a slippery slope suggesting that we would override the view of people who did the listening to people. The suggestion that we pick and choose which of the things that they listened to and recommended to us today we like, as if 138 people say something we don't like, then it's only point something of the dog owners. But if they say something we do like, we're happy about those things, just seems to me fairly close to ridiculous. I think it's of concern that we have what sounds a little like aspersions cast on whether the people who were looking at the bylaw for us were good at listening or understood the issues or had looked at the range of issues that were available to be looked at. We heard from the chairman of that bylaw committee that they had indeed canvassed fully, in their view, the range of issues that were brought before them. If people didn't bring some issues before them at the time because there are the silent lot of retailers, then they've chosen to not bring issues before our committee. Nevertheless, our committee says it looked thoroughly into the issues that were involved. I think it would be disrespectful and particularly undemocratic not to take the recommendation of the people who were looking at this bylaw in this instance.
Further speakers? Councillor Hall.
I'm proposing of letting dogs into the CBD. A lot of people asked for it, and mainly because coffee bars, the biggest majority of our coffee bars and stuff are in the main street, and a lot of people like to take their dog with them and when they go for a coffee. were showing on some videos and slides that were there about around the rest of the world where people take their dogs to restaurants and to bars. Doesn't seem to be any problem. And if we're going to keep up with so many bars and restaurants in the city, these are the patrons that go. So they can take their animal with them. I think it's a good idea.
Can I just clarify for the fact here, if this were to go through the way it's suggested, would it allow people to take their dogs inside bars and cafes? Can I have a, no?
No, my understanding is only on the street.
That's right. Thanks. I just wanted to clarify that. Thank you. Further speakers. Councillor Wilson.
Sorry, can I just ask a question in relation to that clarity? And I'm sorry if it's been asked before, but given that if I go to if this bylaw passes and I walk to our bar and want to have a drink, I have to leave my dog, if I'm by myself, unattended, which is unable in order to order a drink?
You can't do that.
I won't be able to do that. So you have to be going with several people in order to...
You're not permitted to leave your dog unattended at any time.
At any time. So it won't necessarily facilitate exactly the situation that's just been suggested unless you're with a group of people.
If they have seating outside, they can be served outside.
As long as they do that.
Councillor Law.
Oh, look, I just would like to say we set on this in good faith. You know, if you don't like what we do or don't think we're capable, by all means have a crack. I don't care. The one thing I would say in reply to Councillor Hawkins, there's no thought that the dog is to determine where the white line is on the sports field. That is up to the responsibility of the owner, as it always has been in the past. As for going down the main street, we thought this was a suitable thing. I still think it's a suitable thing. We had that very discussion about studded collars and not cleaning, and we've also talked, and staff have said that they would put a huge emphasis on making sure that people do pick up after their dogs. And the other thing, in reply to Councillor Benson Pope, saying 138 people is significant. Remember that you voted the divestment of fossil fuels and 80 less people than that. 58 people asked for that. So just be careful what figures you take and what you don't take. So that's all.
Further speakers to the amendment. Councillor McTavish.
I'd just like to seek some clarity as well, and that's just around the nature of outdoor seating areas. So in many cases they are effectively leased footpaths. In terms of whether dogs are or are not allowed to be in those leased areas, what is the, how does that sit?
So if the cafe owner is leasing a particular area, it's their prerogative if they choose to have a dog in that area or not.
Further speakers. Well, for my part, my concerns have been alluded to with this suggestion, and that is the inability I'm concerned that we haven't identified what failure would look like. So we've suggested a trial in good faith, I accept that, but we haven't said what will make it successful or unsuccessful. And I think if we go into it like that, we're buying ourselves a fight in a year's time when there'll be an argument over whether it's been successful or not. And there'll be no criteria to decide it. And it'll be arguably a shambles at that stage. So while I accept that this suggestion was made in good faith by the panel, I can't see how it can work without further trouble later on. Apart from the concerns already expressed about the inability of people to actually practically exercise the right, because if they, as Councillor Wilson has pointed out, unless there was someone else, they can't do anything in town because they can't leave their dog on their own, they can't go into a shop with the dog. So it's a bit like someone mentioned a Clayton's right. I'm concerned that it's too vague, and we won't know whether the trial's been successful, and we'll end up having an unfortunate argument at the end of the year. And I guess the final thing that worries me is the fact that we don't appear to have consulted the people who will be affected, the businesses that will be affected, and they couldn't have known. I think one speaker has alluded to the fact that they could have come and given their opinion. Well, they couldn't actually, because they didn't know it was going to be suggested until it was too late to put their name down to give their opinion. So it seems to me that some of the people who would be most affected by this have not actually been asked. I may be wrong about that. So I support this amendment too. So if there's no further speakers, Councillor Benson Pope, you wish to exercise your right of reply on the amendment? No. So I'm going to put the amendment. Division.
Councillor Benson Pope.
Aye.
Councillor Calvert.
No.
Councillor Hall.
No.
Councillor Hawkins.
Aye.
Councillor Lord.
No.
Councillor McTavish.
Aye.
Sorry.
Aye.
Aye. Councillor Noon.
No.
Councillor Peat.
No.
Councillor Staines.
Aye.
Councillor Thompson.
Aye.
Councillor Wilson.
No.
Mayor Cole.
Yes.
Right, we have 6 all.
Carried. So we'll move back onto the major resolution, and I'll call for further speakers on that. And from my memory, Councillor Peter's spoken, so only Councillor Benson Pope spoke after that. So I'll call for further speakers on the main resolution. Councillor McTavish.
Thank you, Worship. I rise to speak in support of the work done by the panel. I particularly commend them for the consideration that they have given to the 10-metre rule around wildlife. I think extending that to 20 metres is an eminently sensible decision, and acknowledge the consideration as well that they took of further extending that beyond the 20-metre rule. I think Councillor Peat and the panel are correct in suggesting that beyond about 20 metres it does become increasingly difficult to establish how far away you actually are from any given animal. So I think they've come to a sensible resolution around that. I think the work that they've done to try to isolate the different concerns around things like any given sports field and the playing surface as opposed to the areas around the playing field, that hopefully will resolve some of the issues that came up through the consultation. I guess the one area that I think that we do probably need to do some further work, and I think staff have acknowledged this, is in the education and promotion that sits around this bylaw. I hadn't seen that online tool, Ros, until you sent it through to me, and if I were a dog owner, it would be a really helpful tool for me to establish where I was and was not allowed to use my dog, and under what circumstances. And sorry,
Use my dog.
where I was and was not able to take my dog with or without a leash. But I do think it needs a bit further work in relation to where you are allowed your dog if it is on a leash, because there is a key that shows that as a thing. I think it's orange, but not all of the areas that that rule applies are currently colour-coded in that way. So I think once that is up and running, it would be great if that was able to be developed into an app or something that dog owners could download and have available with them at all times. It would be great if it was available perhaps in specific areas, so that there was perhaps a peninsula one or other areas of the city where people might particularly go and walk their dog often. Yeah, I thank the panel for their work on this bylaw and commend the resolution to everybody.
Councillor Keller.
I'll be voting for this as the best we can do. I think it's a bad day on council when we use 6 people on council.
Can you speak to the current resolution and not the previous one, please?
The current resolution now has within it
Yes.
something that 6 councillors have supported by overriding the bylaw. The best I can do is to vote for it, but it isn't the best we could have done today.
As you correctly point out, Mr Chairman, that's contrary to standing orders to reflect negatively on a decision that's just been made by the council. It should be withdrawn.
Paul, I asked you to refer to the current resolution and I'd like you to withdraw. Yes.
I'll withdraw reflecting negatively on the decision that was just made while acknowledging that it was made by 6 councillors.
Thank you. Further speakers, Councillor Wilson.
I'm going to support this bylaw, and it is the best we can get, but it is a fraught process. And if I think, just reflecting on the previous speaker's disquiet, if she has concerns about that, it's the stage of setting the bylaw and delegation to the committee that it should be given in whole to the hearings panel or not. It wasn't given in whole to the hearings panel for a reason that people wanted to hear that discussion and to have a chance to bring back those concerns. So I've got no problem with the process that's got us here. It is always fraught doing a bylaw. I've sat on a number of them now, and in fact one instance we didn't confirm the bylaw because of the very nature of the type of submissions and the inability to ensure that there was notice to every person affected for the changes we wanted to impose. But having said that, we're stuck here with a culture where dogs are very significant and animals are very significant to people's well-being, and they are in many people's and looking at some people in this room, it is like having their children with them. And in order to enable that sort of the lifestyle that I appreciate what Doug spoke about, that nature, and that and given that we enable that as best we can in the city as best we can elsewhere, other than the commercial area, that's why we're supporting it.
Councillor Thompson.
Yeah, look, I just want to endorse the fact that I felt strongly about one particular aspect of this, but this is, in my view, a good compromise bylaw, and that's essentially all it could ever be. You're just never going to be able to please everybody, particularly when it comes to this particular topic. And I think that to suggest also that having asked a group of councillors to make a decision that it's not appropriate to question that decision ignores the reality, which is that is brought back here for exactly that purpose.
Point of order,
and
I've just been told I wasn't allowed to question the decision that was made.
Sorry, I just think in the interest of consistency, it's important to ensure that all members only speak to the current resolution.
Sorry, I obviously didn't hear you. Did you raise
Sorry, I called a point of order.
And what is the point of order?
And requested that in the interest of consistency, we ensure that all members only speak to the current resolution.
They can, but in this instance, the issue of challenging the recommendation was not core to the previous resolution, so I don't uphold the point of order.
I'll leave it rather than... I think we've done the best that we can with a difficult situation, and I think that what we will find is that we will continue to have complaints, and whatever we had done, we would continue to have complaints. So, I just wanted to make that comment, despite the fact I disagreed with one aspect of it. That was one part of a much larger piece of work, and I'm grateful for that.
Councillor Moon.
Thank you, Worship. Proposed dog control policy, bylaw, keeping of animals and birds bylaw, what a mouthful. And I just want to, I suppose, take this opportunity, like Councillor Wilson, I've been in this position before where you've been sent away as a subcommittee or as a hearings panel to investigate, to listen, to deliberate, and to come back with a message for your colleagues to absorb. And I just really want to acknowledge the panel for doing that, taking a liberal approach and recognising that we do need to move with the times. So I thank the panel for that, and I also thank the panel for, I think, acknowledging that most animal owners, and in this, I suppose this references more to dog owners, the vast majority are responsible, but it's important to reinforce that message and to continue with the education to ensure that we have a better society with dogs and people living and enjoying the same space.
Can I, for my part, take this opportunity to endorse the thank yous to the panel? It's a particularly difficult area to be making decisions on. It's highly emotive, and I didn't, when the panel was appointed, I didn't envy them their task at all, and I still don't, because as Councillor Thompson has said, there's no way you're ever going to please everyone completely. So I thank you for bringing back, and I can support this. It's a very good set of compromises, which it always had to be. The one area I remain concerned about, and it's nothing to do with the decision of the council, of the panel, is the efforts that we appear to have to go to put the rights of wildlife above that of other animals, in this case dogs. I note that, and I know that the panel would have, as has been mentioned by the chair of the panel, struggled with that. I note that we have measures in place to protect stock from dogs, but it seems much harder to put the well-being of our wildlife above the well-being of dogs, and so but panels like this one have to struggle with, is it 20 metres or is it 10 or is it 50? And that's very difficult. And so I think as a community we need to be, especially in the wildlife capital of the South, looking a little harder at the messages we send about the rights of some animals over and above our wildlife. But I have no qualms about supporting this bylaw as it's been brought to us now. Are there any further speakers? There being none, Councillor Pete, sorry.
Thank you, Your Worship. The decision today is about a new bylaw, and it makes changes which largely come down on the side of easing in terms of options for where dogs can be taken on leash or off leash. But with those a few additional rights, I think dog owners are going to have to demonstrate responsibility, and that we're saying that they're going to have to do that in a number of ways. One way which was actually suggested to us was that some communities of dog owners who regularly use parks, such as Jubilee or Kettle, could adopt them and to monitor them in terms of any bad behaviour by dogs or any droppings that are not picked up. So I think the panel recognises that there are some very responsible dog owners who are have formed collaborations in order to try to make things easier certainly for our wardens who are trying to enforce the bylaw. Just something about to the staff. I think, in a sense, you've had a hard job to get to this point. You're going to have another serious amount of work in order to spread the word on what changes have been made. You're going to have to look at new signage, and particularly at those all-important maps, which will be more than anything. Tell people where they can exercise dogs and in what way they can exercise them. So good luck with all that. the enforcement, and many submitters said to us, the enforcement was something that they had no real confidence in terms of the council. And I know the staff have been looking again at how to deploy the authorised officers and so on, and hopefully we can, with the help of responsible dog owners, kind of make sure that this new bylaw it works well. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to put it. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. Thank you. Councillor Tash, you have an resolution you wish to push?
Thank you. Yep. Councillor Peake had previously agreed to include this in his overarching motion, but was deemed appropriate to put it separately, so I'm more than happy to do so.
Right. So is there a seconder for this? Second, Councillor Peake.
Coordinated.
Probably. Sorry, I don't have my contacts in, so I can't read it.
Councillor Wilson, could you direct the questions so we can all...
Sorry, apologies. It's just gone up.
So in
if you'd like to speak
speaking,
to it?
yes, in speaking to this, Your Worship, it seemed to me that in the reading the submissions which were received on these two bylaws, there was one area in which the panel were unable, by virtue of the fact that we have a statutory framework and limitations to that framework, unable to address community concerns, and that was specifically around the issue of cats, specifically stray and feral cats, that are causing not only issues for our wildlife, which I acknowledge are under the current interpretation of the Act, difficult to couch under the LGA and within the context of this bylaw, but not only for wildlife, but also as a public nuisance. They are causing issues for, I think, a reasonable subset of our population. 143 submissions were received on issues relating to cats, demonstrating that people do have an interest in this. So what this motion requests is not specific to these bylaws, because our legal advice does give us a steer on that. However, it is requesting that staff in the development of the coordinated pest management approach, which our park staff, I think, are working on, that we do look at the mechanisms that we currently employ, the measures that we currently employ to address the public nuisance aspect of stray and feral cats, and to make recommendations back to us, identifying any additional measures that might be able to be applied to address this issue. It's not committing us to anything, it's simply saying, could staff please look at these measures. As Ms. Russia has pointed out, I think in her address to us today, it is essential that Council investigate the full suite of potential approaches to address public nuisance in relation to stray and feral cats before it considers applying a bylaw, and that is effectively what this does. Our staff have today, Ms. Day, recommended that we perhaps could do some more work in the area of public education. Certainly, I think that there is room to move there. Ms. Russia has indicated that there may be other approaches that we could employ to address these issues, and it seems sensible that they all be wrapped up in this broader piece of work that is underway, given that you can't control stray cats without impacting on other pest populations and vice versa. So that's why I think this is the appropriate place for it to sit, and it gives clear direction for staff on these issues.
Councillor Wilson.
I'm just wondering if the mover and seconder of this amendment would be prepared to add in a extension to actually work with local government New Zealand and I think the Department of Conservation, encouraging any statute changes that might facilitate the requests as expressed by the submitters, because this is one piece of work, but I don't think it probably goes to where the at the nub of the problem, I think, is that we don't have the statutory framework that provides us to take any action, and I'm just wondering if we should be also trying to facilitate that.
So I guess I'm certainly not opposed to that as an approach, but it does seem to me that before we get to the point of working with other agencies, we probably need to identify what we are currently doing ourselves, the extent to which we could build on that, and perhaps any gaps that exist. And once that report comes back to us, we might be in a better position to take an informed advocacy role in relation to LGNZ or central government policy. So in the first instance, I think getting the information should be our priority, but
I take it that's a no.
yes.
Thank you. There are further Councillor Wilson, do you wish to speak to
Look,
us?
I think there's a lot of councils, or a number of councils, trying to do this work at the moment, and I'm not quite sure that we need to be the only ones putting resources into this internally, when I think we probably find that Wellington's done a lot of this work already and have found the gaps that we need to find and have taken one approach. I think that what I'm hearing right throughout the country is people wanting to make a change here, and I probably want to see our energies being used in the most effective manner that they could be used, and I think if it means working with LGNZ and the Department of Conservation to come to those, and when I think that work is happening, then we should be doing that work alongside the other work that we've got suggested, and that's why I suggested the amendment. I'm happy not to have it added, but I probably don't want to see us copying a whole lot of work that is nice to do, but probably is just reiterating what other people have already found out.
It is pretty standard practice for us not to reinvent the wheel, so if we know someone else is doing it, we'll be following up with LGNZ and those councils.
Further speakers? Councillor Hawkins.
Yeah, thank you, Worship. Much like I don't take issue with the actions of responsible dog owners in the item previous, who will carry their bags and teach their dogs what a white line means. I, for one, am shocked that the irresponsible dog owners didn't show up to participate in that process. I don't have an issue with, this isn't about the vast number of responsible cat owners that we have, and regulation in general isn't about the actions of the responsible. It's about how best we can mitigate the effects caused by the irresponsible. And it is clear that there is a growing community concern around the impact of cats on our wildlife collectively. Tomorrow morning, the Grants Subcommittee will be hearing applications to the Biodiversity Fund, which over the past 10 years has supported private landowners around Dunedin who invested a great deal of their own time and money into helping enhance and restore indigenous flora and fauna and biodiversity values for the greater good of the city and of the species that still live within it, some hanging on by the skin of their teeth or beak, as the case may be. And it is becoming quite clear that while progress can be made, particularly with mustelid populations, it's a struggle, but it can be done. There are very few tools available to people who are leading those efforts to deal with what continues to be a very problematic pest in some cases, that being our cat population. So I think it's imperative that we continue to do everything that we can do within the current legislative and regulatory framework, as well as advocate on behalf of people who do take those wildlife values seriously, as I would hope everyone around this table would, to develop a legislative and regulatory framework that allowed us to do more to support those people in their collective efforts. Thanks.
Further speakers? Okay, Councillor McTavish, do you wish to exercise your reply? Right. I'll put it. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Thank you. And that concludes the meeting. Thank you for your contribution.